Hi there. Welcome to Piece of Work, the podcast. I'm Danielle Tantone. I'm a nurse, author, coach, and survivor. I love inspiring people to live their best life, reach for those big dreams, and find joy even in the pain. As I wrote my memoir over so many years, trying to make sense of a story where I was way too often the bad guy instead of the hero, I came to understand that we are all a piece of work, but we're also a work in progress. And even in our messiness, we are a work of art too, all at the very same time. In fact, we are all beautifully unique pieces of one masterpiece, waves in the same ocean. This podcast will explore the stories and struggles that make us human, the miracles that surround us, and all the ways we work to make sense of it all. Welcome to Piece of Work, the podcast.
Hello, welcome. I'm Danielle Tantone, and I'm here with my friend and Medicare colleague, Brian McArthur. Brian and I met a couple years ago in Iowa, actually, at a Medicare conference in February of, was it 2021? And so. I remember flying there from, you flew from San Diego and I flew from Phoenix. And I was like, who the heck would go to Iowa in the middle of winter when they live in a place where it's sunny and people come in the middle of winter? But there we were for a conference. And Brian has been doing Medicare for a number of years, longer than me. He'll tell us about it. His company is called designmymedicare.com, and he is an expert in the Medicare Execution Process. It's his own program that he's come up with that helps financial advisors to guide their clients through Medicare. So I think without further ado, I want to hear more about that to start with, Brian, and then we'll talk some more personal stuff a little later.
Sure. I feel like I'm your least interesting podcast.
Well, no one really grows up thinking they want to be a Medicare agent. So let's start with that. How did you decide that you wanted to get into Medicare?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's just so great to reconnect. So my professional background prior to getting into the Medicare space was in financial services, wholesale distribution, to convert that to English. In the same way that there's probably pharmaceutical sales representatives, Danielle, who buy donuts for doctors and try to get the doctor to listen to them while I eat the donut. Say, prescribe my meds if you got somebody who's got this ailment. There's that role exists in financial services. So at every Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, UBS, Wells Fargo, LPL office, maybe after COVID this has changed a bit, but basically, you go in and meet with the financial advisors. I typically worked for insurance companies distributing annuity products, long-term care products, some investment products, and would just try to educate the advisors on, when to consider whatever product I was using, and then hopefully use us versus competitors, right? Mm-hmm. So I had a great career, really enjoyed it. Everybody I've ever met in my whole career were financial advisors. I did that for not quite 20 years, but had a really great career. I dug it. And then had some personal events that came up probably around the same time that I can look back more clearly and less self-judgmentally and just see maybe I was kind of burning out on that. So I had some personal events that kind of prompted just stepping back from that. So when I stepped back from wholesaling, which is what, a financial advisor would say, oh, Brian was an annuity wholesaler, a long-term care wholesaler. I had seen colleagues of mine stop wholesaling for whatever reason. They got laid off or life changed or they wanted something new. And very often they would become financial advisors, which logically made some sense because we had the same license security and
we knew about all those products.
Right. For me, it just never really felt like my calling. Not to say I didn't consider it, but I've always put a high value on relationships. I know everybody says that, but when I took a step back from wholesaling, I had to figure out what I was going to do next. Without going into a bunch of detail, unless you ask me to later, I was also kind of going through some personal experiences, which I guess you could.
Yeah, let's talk about that later. I do want to talk about
Okay. Yeah. So basically, I guess on paper, it's a mental health crisis. But anyway, so I had to figure out what I was going to do. And I did not want to become a financial advisor. And I did not feel that the corporate environment was going to suit me well at that point. I just knew I needed a little bit more autonomy to kind of navigate some things. I had seen a lot of well-intentioned education directed at the financial advisor community. I did not see a lot of results. And that's not trying to be a ninny, and wag a finger or anything like that. I mean, a lot of in financial services, they talk about value-added information, which is like, oh, isn't this great? Please keep us in mind on who gave this to you down the road. Not a whole lot of results you can measure. So that's not even that intolerable in the financial services industry. But I knew there was some sort of insurance transaction at the end of the Medicare education effort. And I thought, boy, this is kind of complicated. It's messy. It changes all the time. The financial advisor, the revenue is way too low for advisors who want to get involved in, but Medicare is in every financial planning software and everybody skips over it for reasons you and I understand. So, I had a theory, and then everybody has to go into the market and get punched in the face and figure out if they're right on their theory, that maybe I could build a nice symbiotic business alongside the advisor without, top-down management and, that sort of thing. And so I set out to do that, and starting off in Southern California. And, as we sit here today, about 7.5 years in, there's, several hundred financial advisors across the country who now no longer skip over Medicare in their financial planning process because, they've learned how and where and when to use the Medicare execution process, which is, usually starts with an introduction to my team and me.
So just to kind of clarify, since I kind of know what you do from the other end, you basically you continue to build relationships with those financial advisors, and you take over with their clients on just the Medicare portion. You don't, and then you also build them up in the process. You make them look good because you are a specialist just on Medicare now, and you refer them right back to their financial advisor for everything else. So you not only make them look like a hero because you do know Medicare and you are able to give the best advice to each client based on their situation, but then you get the business and they keep their business. Like it's like a win-win situation, and they don't have to deal with the annoying, details of Medicare, and for them, it's just such a small commission. It's not even worth the trouble that it probably causes.
Right. No, that's a great recap. I'm glad we're recording this. I'll probably steal your recap. But, or you could use that in your own business. But
I have used it. I've learned from you, and I've used it on a much smaller scale, but yes, I do. That's exactly what I say to the financial advisors I meet with. Oh, great. I could hear my text coming through.
Yeah, that's all right. And it's all about just making sure we get a good result for the client under the watchful eye of the advisor. The litmus test that I teach my employees and that I've, always held myself to is everything we're doing reflecting well on the financial advisor? And if that answer is yes, everything else seems to take care of itself. The result to the client, the optics to the advisor, revenue to us, that sort of thing. And then, if there's, as we weave it into the advisor's broader financial planning process, other topics come up. Clients bring stuff up to us. It's not because we're so wonderful. It's because we came by way of the advisor. And we love being like a dog with a bone and just, reporting back to the advisor, hey, we concluded the Medicare enrollment. Here's what you need to know. Your client asked this question. I satiated their curiosity this much, but basically wrapped up by letting them know how well prepared you are to continue that conversation with them. And that's a fun part of the process.
Yeah, that's awesome. So tell me about the Medicare execution process. Like, what do you actually do? What is the Medicare execution process?
Yeah, so it's really designed to run alongside the advisor's practice, financial planning practice, do the one thing the advisor doesn't do and wouldn't if they could, right? So Medicare. It's not the most important part of the financial planning process, but when it comes up, it's complicated, it's messy, it changes all the time. There's a deadline. So when it's important, it's really important, right? So ultimately, the end result is getting the client educated, prepared for what Medicare is, what it isn't, what it's going to cost, what they have to do by when, and wrap up the enrollment with some sort of insurance solution. It's either Medicare Supplement or Medicare Advantage, whether that's months or years after we meet the client. But typically what happens is I tell advisors that, number one, Medicare is usually good news to great news in almost every situation for the client, which is kind of unexpected. But it's really true. And I tell the advisor, you like being associated with good news, right? And they all do, right? And I said, okay, look, everybody's eligible at 65. Advisors knew that already. Not everybody enrolls at 65. Some people work until it stops being fun at age 68 or whatever. But at age 64, every client, non-client, every human being in the United States starts getting more mail than you can possibly imagine. It's all fear-based marketing from the Medicare industry. Totally. Yep. You and I don't really do any of that, but that's the way the industry works. And it starts with telling the advisor, you should want to demonstrate some leadership on this because you're going to look cool and get some good optics, which is helpful. Financial advisors do not want the client's perception of their value to be entirely tied to portfolio performance because nobody can control it. So they're looking for ways to demonstrate some unexpected value. And anytime you can turn a complicated topic into something simple and meet a deadline, those are good opportunities. So, ultimately, if the advisors like anything I share with them, their action step is to sort for just their 64-year-olds. And they call them up and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, it's your financial advisor, Jim. Can I ask a question I already know the answer to? How much mail are you getting about Medicare these days? And then I've taught several hundred advisors across the country to then stop talking, because the clients reply with laughter like over half the time, because that's how laughable the amount of mail is. And that is what kind of starts this low friction intro where the advisor says, hey, we have a plan for that. I knew why I'm calling. You can throw that stuff out. I don't want you dealing with strangers. We tend to work best with Design by Medicare. They make this easy, report back to us. This is all they do. I'll introduce you to, Brian and the team over email. They'll keep us updated. And then we don't really follow up. Sounds great, but not that we couldn't, but if everything we're doing is reflecting well on the advisor, I just don't want to create some high friction sales environment. And candidly, we don't have to anyway, because the advisor's engaging the client at the height of their confusion, age 64. The clients do not expect the advisor's help, but they really appreciate it. But it's all because it's at 64. I tell advisors, when this call works as well as I promise you it will, you got to pinky swear me. You're not going to get cocky and start calling 63-year-olds. This call means nothing to a 63-year-old, but you're a rock star at 64. So, call them at 64.
Now, right? Do they call right when they turn 64, or is it a few months into it when they're already getting all this mail?
I just say 64. If you're calling a client 64 in 1 month, maybe you ask about the mail, they don't laugh yet, and I tell the advisor, you're going to think I'm lying to you, but like your very next quarterly review with the client, the very first words out of their mouth are, "Oh, now I see what you're talking about," and they laugh about it, right? So I just usually say 64.
Okay. All right. Very cool. So that sounds like a good plan. So then once you said something about you don't really follow up, so you get a referral. What do you mean you don't really follow up?
So again, I go to great lengths to create as low friction and fiduciary-esque an experience as I can make it. Now, people throw around the word fiduciary all too liberally, and I don't mean to do that. You and I can never claim to be a fiduciary because we work on insurance commission. We don't bill for fees, right? But if you know anything about the Medicare industry, the revenue on almost no matter what the client does is pretty darn similar. So I stay agnostic to what the people do. I just lay out the trade-offs and help them understand it, and they choose what's best for them. But one, because that's a nice way to run a business. But number two, that's the way most financial advisors who I deal with operate their business. So always trying to emulate the way they run their business. And none of the financial advisors, the days of like calling and following up and trying to jam a square peg in a round hole are over. Thank goodness.
Oh yeah. Nobody likes to be sold like that.
Right. So two reasons. One, I tell the advisor, I never tell you what to do. I just tell you what works best, which is my passive aggressive way of telling you what to do. Do not give the client my phone number. Tell them about us verbally, offer to introduce us over email. We reply to that email one time in a reply to all. Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Financial Advisor, Mrs. or Mrs. Client. What typically works best is if you click this link below, you choose a day and time when you want us to call you, goes right into our calendar, and we follow it religiously. With your permission, we'd like to keep your financial advisor updated on our the non-health related parts of our conversation. And it takes a lot of audacity for people to not do what typically works best. Right? I always hear this thing about like, oh, people 65, they don't know how to use the internet. Like I've experienced exactly 0% of that. Like it's fine. And then we send that email one time. 90% of the time, the client clicks on the link almost immediately. It's not because it's such a privilege to speak to Brian McArthur, because this is how much the client appreciates the advisor engaging the client at the height of their confusion and their mailbox is exploding with mail, and says, hey, here's how we handle it. That's the real reason. The other part of it is just in this digital age, this is kind of a higher volume business, as you know, like, the
amount of commission you earn on one client is not enough to pay your
right
or your
right. So it's a higher volume deal. So efficiency is important. And candidly, in this day and age, like people click on the link, they tell me when to call them. I literally treat it like a sport to call people the minute they ask me to. And clients love it.
Called me right on time today.
Yeah, well, I try. I really
put time on the same calendar that they do.
Right. Yeah. And the first words out of the client's mouth is, boy, when you say 11:30, you really mean 11:30. And it's a great way to start a conversation. And very few people grumble about the link. And I find, for whatever it's worth, that the most successful and highest net worth clients
appreciate it, probably.
Oh, they love the link.
It's valuable too.
And I know that, like, I've had people, Medicare is funny in that the revenue is really the same, whether the client lives under a bridge or owns a company that built the bridge, right? It's kind of whack, right?
That is one of the most amazing things about it, I think.
Yeah. So as a result, I always say there's no trophy for this. I could never prove it, Danielle. I suspect I enroll more high net worth clients into Medicare than maybe any other Medicare agent in the country. Sounds fancy. I always hope it impresses my mother-in-law. But in reality, my revenue is unchanged, right? It's just that everybody comes by way of their financial advisor. So I have, like, what I think is the most.
In order to have a financial advisor, you have to have some financial network to work with, right?
Yeah. So as a result, it's funny because I don't, what was I going to say about that? So the revenue is about the same, but everybody I'm dealing with is usually more, higher net worth person. My revenue doesn't change, right? But I get to meet some really interesting people. I mean, for compliance reasons, I can't rattle it off, but like I've got, clients that people would know. I don't have nearly as deep a relationship as the advisor. This isn't something I would shout from the rooftops because I'm a small part of the advisor's practice. But but yeah, I've got like people that, have hundreds of employees and I've called them and they're like talking to their CFO and they're like, hey, Brian, they're like, so right before you called, I told, I'm in a meeting, my CFO, John, hi, John, right? And he goes, and I just told the guy, like, we have to end at 1:59 because I go, watch this, the phone's going to ring at 2. And then I call and then they're laughing because he's like, I told you, all right, I'll see you later, right? But, little things like that, people really appreciate. And it also builds a lot of efficiency because if you leave me a voicemail, I'm embarrassed to say how long it's going to take me to call you back. I don't really do a lot of unscheduled phone calls. It's going to be a much worse experience than just doing what typically works best.
Right. No, I appreciate that. And it's very different than how I work because I am, I usually typically go to my clients' homes as long as they're local. I do some over the phone enrolling, but that's what kind of differentiates me is I'm I'm also a former realtor, so I kind of enjoy going to all these different homes,
Sure.
and I enjoy seeing where they live. So, but yes, phone is definitely more efficient. So do you just talk to your clients on the phone? You don't even do a Zoom like this where you don't really see them at all here.
I do Zoom sometimes. And I will say, like, everybody's at a certain spot where they are in, new trends or anything like that. Video is, I know it's going to sound like duh, but video is so powerful. I wind up doing, I always say Zoom or phone, and some people will say Zoom is okay. And then I either remember to send them the link or not. But actually, I really do like doing Zoom. Depends where I am in the haircut cycle, right? So I was trying to get.
It's nice to see their face. Like, it's not even about their beauty or their hair. I mean, my hair's a mess. I just stuck it up in a bun. But it's like you see their expressions. You see it's more real. It's more like a real person. And I like it for being able to show them things. Like, even if I'm not like a tech wizard and can like pull it up on the screen and share my screen, because half the time that doesn't work for me, I can literally go like this and show you what I want to show you, because they're visual too. Like that's
and it is helpful. I mean, in this day and age, I got to tell you, like this is why video is so important. I was in a Morgan Stanley office a couple of weeks ago, and you and I talked on that day to talk about this, right? And you have a friend, family friend,
who works there, yeah.
And I was sitting down with these advisors who send me clients all the time, haven't seen them in person in years, which is very COVID and post-COVID. Mm-hmm. And we caught up, and I could sense that we both were like,
holy cow, he got old.
Well, even if it's not that, it's just like, all right, dude, like, well, it's good seeing you. And this is nice, but feels like such a supreme waste of time. Like, we don't even feel like we need to see each other. So, and the only way to combat that, I think, is video. And, but it really has a lot of value. Like, I post videos on LinkedIn, which is where I put most of my content, because that's where the financial advisors are. And it's this crazy thing with video or podcasting. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you see this as a podcast host. One, like, putting yourself in video for the first time is like ripping off the Band-Aid. It's so uncomfortable. And then you just do it. And then you go back and watch yourself. And even if it's not perfect, which it never will be, it's like, post it, move on. Mm-hmm. And you go back and watch it again. And then ultimately you go, could have done that a little bit better. I could have said that a little bit better. And then you just improve it.
Yeah.
And then your stuff gets better and better over time because you want it to be better. But it also creates this like unspoken perception of progress as your podcast editing gets better, or your video, or your lighting.
Yeah.
And the other thing I point out to people, as they go off on a social media or video tangent that you didn't ask me about. Sorry about that. But
no, it's okay. This is all relevant. It's relevant to me personally, and I'm sure it's relevant to my listeners, because they're either interested for themselves or, somebody else.
Yeah.
So.
And I just say, go for it. Like, I will post stuff on LinkedIn, and then it goes nowhere and it bombs. And I am the first one to laugh at myself that I thought anybody would care about that. And I just find it hilarious. Like, when you're like, oh my God, nobody cared. Right. Mm-hmm. And then, but you know what? There's really no consequence to posting something that bombs. Totally. So I really encourage
most of the time. I mean, really, how many people really even see it? The reality.
Yeah. Well, and I post everything assuming nobody's going to see it. Mm-hmm. And I find on LinkedIn anyway, I have about.
LinkedIn is definitely, I'm working on getting back to LinkedIn, because I think that is actually an underused platform, especially if you're doing business to business, but even if you're not. So,
for sure. Yeah. Like I think the person with the most followers on LinkedIn is Shay Rowbottom. She's a digital marketing creator. She's really kind of brilliant beyond her years, but she's all about just, video, and she'll make some really good points. Like, I saw she has like 700,000 followers, which is a ton on LinkedIn. And she mentioned recently, she's like, I would have 1 million if I had a husband and kids. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, well, I've got a wife and kids. Right. And then I went back, and I'm a knucklehead as well. Like, some people will be like, Brian, you really have LinkedIn figured out. I'm like, I feel like I'm
just figure it out as you go.
A drunk guy with one leg shorter than the other, stumbling around in a china shop in circles in the dark. But I'm glad you think I have this figured out. But like, I looked at the metrics and the personal posts, you just get more eyeballs. And nobody cares that much about you. If you acknowledge that, it's a good place to be in life, because it's true. But every time it comes up, it's Danielle Tantone, Medicare agent. And, the amount of people that dig into what I posted 4 weeks ago is none, but it's just the eyeballs. And I'm shocked at how many people know what I'm up to who've never liked and commented on a post. And video is the way that your imperfections are absolutely perfect. It's like, just go for it.
Right. That's cool. So basically, then let's just say I'm a client who's I was referred by a financial planner. We called today. We're on Zoom. What do you say to me? What's like how does it go? What's your spiel?
Yeah, so I start the conversation. I usually acknowledge that I realize who their financial advisor is and tell them I think they're they're great. And then I typically just say, okay, we're going to talk about Medicare today, right? Even though that's all I do. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. And I usually say something like, hey, so I always show up fully prepared to bark everything I think I know about Medicare. Is there anything you'd like me to know on the front end? And some people just shrug and go, no, I don't know anything. And I joke around and go, that's great. The bar is low to impress you, right? But other people will share things that are just kind of on their mind. And it really doesn't matter what they share, because I'll make a note of it, but I was going to uncover it anyway.
Hey, Medicare, Brian, pause for a second and look at your screen. It keeps doing this thing where it like focuses and then goes in and out. Is there anything is there any reason why it keeps doing that? Like as you're talking, just keep watching it as you're talking. Watch yourself, because
I will do that.
It almost looks like a camera is trying to focus. So
see.
Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
it's okay.
Doing it.
Did it just do it then?
I don't know. I was thinking that.
Probably me.
It's like you taking the car to the mechanic and it doesn't do what it was doing anymore.
Yeah. So ultimately,
what kinds of questions might they have? Like, what kinds of concerns or things might they come to you with?
Probably early on in the very beginning. Hey, I'm turning 65 and getting all this mail. I've got benefits through my employer or my husband's. I don't think I need to do anything, but I'm not sure, because all the mail they're getting is trying to scare the stuffing out of them. Other people might have health issues right up front. They're like, hey, I just want to let you know, like, this is what I have going on, or what my spouse has going on. Those are probably the things that people would share immediately. And then really, no matter what they say, I thank them for that and make a note. And then I go, okay, so typically what I find is most helpful is if you indulge me in giving you a gentle introduction to Medicare. Some of it you may have already discovered. I just find that if I say it out loud, I kind of know we're on the same page. Would that be helpful? Yes. Everybody says yes. And then the reason I think it's so important to let them share whatever it's on their mind up front. I'm a little bit of a talker, but even though I'm not, even if I wasn't, there's a lot of explaining. Like, I record my Zoom calls, and a lot of times I have this software that kind of measures things. It's like 83% me talking, 17% theirs. And as you know, in sales, they're always like, you got two ears and one mouth, right? But
But yeah, there's a lot of educating that has to happen.
Right. So from there, I go, okay, well, Medicare's good news to great news. Oh, really? Yeah. I go, you're going to usually get one or both of the following: way better benefits than you've ever had, which is nice. And it's way cheaper in real dollars than any health insurance you've ever had. Don't get too excited, because if you're a W-2 employee, you're usually not paying the full cost, but the real cost of Medicare is way cheaper, and it's always better. But I go, we'll test that theory to see if it's cheaper for you or not. Maybe it will be, maybe it won't. It'll be the best health insurance you've ever had, pretty much always. And then I just go through parts A, B, C, and D. I cheat a little bit And I tell them, if you read Medicare for Dummies, you might catch me cheating. There's no consequences to the way I'm cheating.
No, would you mind? Would you mind, just because my audience may not know ABCD,
Sure.
humor me and just kind of actually do it? Like, pretend I'm 64. I look really good for my age.
Yeah. Impossible to imagine you're 64. I'll stretch.
Oh, whatever. There's plenty of I use Retin-A now. I found out that Retin-A is good, not only good for the acne I had in 7th grade, but it's good for wrinkles. So
oh my God. Oh, really? Okay.
They prescribed it.
I grew up on Retin-A. My mom, even I look back and nobody ever busted me for this, but my mom, because I had a lot of acne, she introduced me to like foundation, and I would,
oh my gosh,
I would put it on, and I was always worried somebody would like catch on to like McArthur's wearing makeup, but it blended. But I was really careful. But
funny.
That and Retin-A like got me through, middle school. But anyway, so out of all the alphabet soup you see and hear about Medicare, parts A, B, C through X, Y, Z, this really comes down to checking 4 boxes when you're ready. Think of a full Medicare package as Part A, Part B, Part C, Part D. Okay. Parts A and B come from the government. Parts C and D come from insurance companies. So that's the first line in the sand I want everybody to draw in their mind, right? A and B from the government, C and D from insurance companies. Part A is going to become your new benefits for inside the hospital. You're not going to use this a lot, God willing, because I really hope you're not in the hospital a lot. Right. But if you're lying in a hospital bed, you'll rack up some Part A expenses. Rather than bore you to tears with all the insurance vernacular on what Part A does and does not cover, I would think of it this way. It covers room and board, food and beverage at the worst resort you've ever been to. And everybody laughs.
So many good lines, Brian.
And they go, I get it. I go, great. So that's Part A. Unless you're lying in a hospital bed, you won't see Part A bills. Part B is how your doctors get paid, and everybody who supports your doctors, essentially all of the action or activity or risk is Part B. Everything in your life's a Part B bill, unless you're lying in a hospital bed. So once you have parts A and B together, which is either at age 65, if you're jumping on Medicare at 65, or 68, because you're going to work till 68. Once you get your Medicare card with A and B on it, that's basically Medicare promising to pay 80% of your medical bills and 0% of your medication. So the government gets you pretty far down the road. 80% of your medical bills, 0% of your meds. If the government gives you that 80% for a low monthly premium, which is usually the case, but Danielle, you and I are going to test that theory in just a moment here. That's usually why no matter what you do for Part C and D, this usually feels like a pretty good deal no matter what, because the government covers so much, and by most people's estimates, doesn't charge a whole lot for it. Okay? So that's A and B. So as we look to Parts C and D, remember that's when insurance companies come into play. Whatever you do for Part C, this is where I'm cheating. No consequence to the way I'm cheating. That's going to be an insurance company paying the other 20% of your medical bills. So if the government covered 80 and an insurance company covers 20, now you got about 100% coverage. And Danielle, anytime you hear Part D, just think D is for drugs. Okay. All right. So, pardon?
And not the illegal kind.
Right, exactly. This is a judge, although this is a judgment-free zone, right? So anyway, as we look at Parts C and D, there is a fork in the road. This thing goes over my shoulder, so I can't reach as high as it like. So fork in the road. There's 2 paths to Parts C and D. You can only choose one. This is not heroes and villains. Both options are the path to the best health insurance you've ever had. One path to Parts C and D is called a Medicare supplement plan. The other path is called Medicare Advantage. Now, Medicare supplement plans, I'm going to adjust this a little bit since you're in Phoenix. So I know your listeners are everywhere, but probably like
I bring up California all the time in my presentation, though, because I explained to them why somebody would ever choose a Medicare supplement. Because honestly, for most of my clients, they're like, I don't understand why would anyone choose that? That doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, in Phoenix.
And I have to use the California market to explain to them, because Yeah, we have such better Advantage plans. But anyway.
So we'll do, okay. So I'll stick with that because then I don't have to pivot. So Medicare Supplement, sexiest PPO plan imaginable. That's honestly the best way to explain it. Medicare Advantage plans historically have been the sexiest HMO plans imaginable. However, while I'm going to explain them that way to start, there's starting to be a ton of PPO options there. But just to set the two bookends for now, let's just think Medicare Supplement, sexy PPO, Medicare Advantage, sexy HMO. If I do a good job of explaining that, then I'll sprinkle in what's in the middle, which is Medicare Advantage PPO, which is just more good news. Okay. So with Medicare Supplement, you keep all the doctors that you know and love. And if you need a second opinion across town, out of the county, out of state, it's just fine. You go anywhere you want in the country without a referral. So far that would sound like a PPO to somebody that's used to a PPO. And that's exactly what it feels like. It's actually a little bit more flexible than a traditional PPO in one particular way. If you're sitting on a PPO now, you don't need referrals and you try to stay in network. You can go out of network. You probably rarely do that because it costs more. With a Medicare Supplement, there are no networks to worry about. So if the best left toe orthopedist for you is in Albuquerque, go to Albuquerque and you can have another doctor at Banner in Phoenix and another one at Cedars-Sinai in LA. Doesn't matter. I actually don't even need to know who your doctors are if you do a Medicare Supplement plan because you go anywhere you want. As long as the doctors take original Medicare, 98% of them do. The largest portion of the 2% who don't are at Kaiser Permanente, which if your listeners say, I don't know who that is, then definitely don't worry about it. If you're in Southern California or some other places, you'd know Kaiser, but that's the only place you can't go. So the top version of a Medicare Supplement plan, I always tell people, I'm not pushing you here. I'm just setting this as a bookend. I want you to think of this as good as it gets, as expensive as it gets, but not the only option. And keep in mind, when I say it's as good as it gets, Danielle, there really are no bad options, but this is the most robust package, if you will. It's called Plan G. Every insurance company who sells Medicare Supplement plans has Plan G as their highest option. I'm going to call it Plan Great for the balance of our discussion today, because if I start talking to you about Plan G to address Part C, our heads will explode, or at least mine will, trying to explain this to you. So we're going to call it Plan Great. So what does life look like on Plan Great? Well, you already know, go see any doctor in the country, no referrals, no networks. We covered that. You would have an annual deductible of a whopping $226 a year. So basically your first doctor's visit every year is on you, because it'll probably cost you $226. You'll pay it. And once you pay the $226, you really go the rest of the year, every year, without ever seeing a doctor bill or hospital bill. That's really what life feels like on Plan Great. You still have medication copays, but doctors and hospitalization, $226, then leave your wallet at home. So without you having to be a health insurance expert, you could probably deduce that's about as good as health insurance could get in 2023. So big dramatic buildup. How much of these things cost depends on the geography. In general, age 65, probably 140, 150, 160 bucks a month in most major metropolitan areas. In addition, if people want that route, they have to buy a separate Part D drug plan. Interest of time, I usually tell people those are $30 a month. It's a wacky business. There's plans that are $8 a month. There's plans that are $108. If I say 30, nobody will call me or you a liar. So we'll just say that, but there's a lot of them cheaper than that. And cheap isn't necessarily bad. Expensive is not necessarily good. So that's what life feels like on a Medicare Supplement plan. Does that make sense?
So it adds up to about $300 all the door.
Right.
Assuming you're not paying the premium for having a higher income on the Part B.
And I think I skipped over. So Part A had no monthly premium. Part B, most of us pay $165 a month. It can go higher based on your income. Single filers over $97,000 a year, and joint filers over $194 would have to worry about that. And in the interest of time, but just you and I cover that in great detail. Because a lot of times that could easily be the biggest premium out of everything. But yeah, most people pay $165 for Part B, figure $150 for a Plan Great. We're at $315, $30 for a drug plan. What's it? $335, $345, and then dental and vision if they wanted. So maybe.
Brian, look at the screen because it keeps doing it as you're talking. See,
yeah, interesting.
What it's doing, it's like focusing. Is it just your computer screen, or is it something
I
fancier?
wouldn't think so. I wonder if the back light because I got that big bright light. I wonder if that's goofing it up. Let me see.
Maybe from the window, you mean?
Yeah, it just did it again. I see.
I'm not going to worry about it. I don't do a whole lot with video either. I just, in the interest of time, I'm not great at it. But
Yeah. So
this part probably won't be edited out. So who's ever listening to this,
oh, good. Well, what did I say? People want the imperfections, right? Exactly. Except on video quality, right? So anyway, so the other path to Part C and D is called Medicare Advantage. Now, the very first thing people would notice at Medicare Advantage is that they do not cost $150 a month for Part C and $30 for Part D. They almost always cost $0 for C, $0 for D. And that does not mean it's crummy coverage. Pretty magnificent coverage. Historically, those were HMOs. They were magnificent HMOs. And if you're okay with an HMO, you'd love it. Especially where you live in Maricopa County, there is a ton of PPO Medicare Advantage plans that sit right in the middle of Medicare Supplement with a monthly premium and Medicare Advantage HMO, no monthly premium. Right in the middle, you have 0 premium PPO plans. And I can tell you, and I'm sure you see this.
Yeah, I would never use that verbiage of calling the supplement a PPO. That would totally confuse my people, because 99% of my clients are on a PPO Advantage plan.
Yeah.
Because there would be no reason to do either of the other ones for them. Even though I explain them both and explain the benefits, it's just doesn't make sense to them. They're like, why would I want to do that?
And maybe I'll learn something here. I go back and forth on how to explain it, but I tell people, while Medicare Supplement might be the sexiest PPO ever, and you could probably afford it, like a Medicare Advantage PPO plan is still the best PPO you've ever had, and that probably has no monthly premium. It does make it almost more difficult to explain in places like Maricopa County. But what happens if you have that conversation 100 times with somebody who could afford the supplement? They're usually thinking like, okay, well, I can afford the 150 plus 30. It's not an issue, but why am I paying anything since this Medicare Advantage PPO plan is so darn good? And that's a good way to look at it. The Medicare Advantage PPO plans usually have no monthly premium, no deductible. There's co-pays for everything. They're very modest. You're happy to pay them because you have no monthly premium. When I say no monthly premium, you're still paying $165 a month for Part B or more based on your income, but you pay $0 for C and D. And then, as there are PPOs. You don't need referrals. The networks are pretty big, so it's pretty easy to stay in network. You can go out of network, but you try not to do that. And they all have a max out-of-pocket limit that honestly is very difficult to hit unless you get cancer. So it's kind of all good news, and then you might get dental and vision thrown in on that side. Like the Medicare Advantage plans are chock full of extra benefits that Medicare doesn't require. But there's some other things to go, but I don't want to go I don't want to keep talking unless you tell me to.
No, I think that like I said, that's kind of my wheelhouse. And I feel like 90% of most of your business is Medicare supplements.
In California, but my business is across the country. But in areas like yours, it's fewer Medicare supplements because, just like you pointed out, the PPO Medicare Advantage plans, especially in Arizona, are like lights out. Like there's way less of a reason to buy a Medicare supplement.
Yeah, because it's almost like more value for less money. Like it includes dental and vision and gym membership and all these things that, So that said, what about people? The question I get asked a lot is, what about travel? How are you covered when you travel?
Right. So, Medicare supplement plans have to offer a travel benefit. Medicare Advantage plans don't, but most do at this point. In general, both of them will cover you for an international hospitalization overseas for the first 60 days of your trip. Most people are traveling less than 60 days. And in general, they expect you to lay out the money and then get reimbursed by the insurance company. And It's pretty good. I have a lot of people that don't buy extra insurance because they find that what the international hospitalization benefit that's built into their Medicare supplement or Medicare Advantage plan is pretty good. I'm sure there's always more robust plans you can buy that just cover like every little thing. I have heard, as I'm sure you have, that if you're traveling in a first world country and it's, let's say, an extended hospitalization, that the insurance company might say, hey, instead of laying out the money and getting reimbursed, like, you can have the hospital direct bill us, we'll pay it to save you. I think there's a better chance that happens in the UK. If you're going kayaking in Zimbabwe, like, you're probably going to have to pay the hospital bill and get reimbursed later.
All right. So yeah, that's always a concern for people. Is it better with the supplement? Is it better with the Advantage plan, or does it just depend on the? Yeah. All right. So we talked a lot about Medicare. We probably bored our listeners, but honestly, like, I think it's fascinating. And I think even people our age, we're both in our 40s. I think I'm a little few years older than you.
No, we're the same, right?
Yeah. I don't.
My 30th high school reunion is tonight in Long Island.
Mine was 2 years ago. So
okay.
I'm older.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was last year. I don't remember. I graduated in 92.
Okay. I was 93.
See, you're 1 year younger than me. It matters. Anyway, yeah. So even people our age who really are not at all thinking of Medicare yet, because we're not 64. And like you said, we don't think about it until then. We might have parents that are on it, and some of us may want to understand what's happening. So, yeah. But what was I going to ask you? Oh, what about people who are they're turning 65, but they're still working? Do you recommend that do you do an audit? Do you look at what they're currently paying and their benefits compared to what they would get on Medicare? And especially if they're a high income earner, maybe it does make sense for them to stay on their company benefits. How do you handle that part?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I typically uncover their income earlier on. I kind of skipped over that part when I explained it to you, but they all appreciate the gentle introduction to Medicare at 64, even if they know they're going to keep on working. So when we get to the end of that, I summarize it a little bit, but I just told you what I tell people for the most part. Mm-hmm. And then I say, okay, but we already know you're going to stay, continue working. So, you might be wondering, what do I have to do? What do I not have to do? Well, as long as you have employer-sponsored health insurance from an employer with over 20 full-time employees, 99% chance you are fine just staying there. Don't worry about late enrollment penalties and all the scare tactics. You just keep working until it stops being fun. And we do most or all of this stuff whenever you're ready to retire. But the question is, what should you do? Well, if you have under 20 employees, you need to go on to Medicare. Most people work for a company with over 20 employees. So I just say, look, we'll go through some math here. Most of the time we conclude you should just stay on the employer plan, but sometimes it's not the case. So what I like to find out is, in general, do you think your health insurance at work is awful? Is it okay? Is it terrific? People usually say it's okay. Like, okay, do you know about how much they pull out of your paycheck per family member to insure you? The lower that the employee, the lower the amount that the employer pulls out of the employee's paycheck, the more desirable it'll probably be to just stay on the employer plan. The more the employer charges, the more desirable Medicare might be. Medicare will pretty much always be great health insurance, but if you don't need great health insurance, you're okay with okay health insurance. Like, why go on to Medicare and pay more for the best health insurance when you can kind of do it anytime after 65? So yeah, I'm usually looking at what are they pulling out of your paycheck? What's your income? Especially if they're going to keep on working, their income might stay high, and the higher their income, the more we say, no, stay on the employer plan. Sometimes, an employer might offer a crummy plan and they charge the employee quite a bit for it. And Medicare just might be straight up better and cheaper for the employee to go on. Nobody can make the employee leave the group plan. That would be age discrimination. But if it's better, you can do it.
Yeah, I just met with somebody yesterday where, her employer plan was good, but it was costing her about $400 a month between the two paychecks she had a $3,000 deductible. And just kind of right there, I was like, well, even no matter what your copays are, like it makes sense. Let's take a look at this. And so she'll most likely do an Advantage plan, just because, like I said, here where I live in Arizona, most of my clients, it makes more sense. Yes, they have networks and they have to, think about that, but we've worked with the network our whole life up until 65. Exactly. So I don't know why we need to suddenly have no networks anymore.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the fact is, like, just because you can go get a second opinion in, Baltimore, Maryland, like, you're probably not going to do that. Even if you have a PPO, you're probably going to go to whoever your primary doctor is.
The really big exception here, because I live in Arizona, we have the Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale. And that's the really big exception here, is for whatever reason, I'd love to meet with the high ups, the C-suite at Mayo Clinic, and understand their whole thing, but it's way over my head. But they don't really work with the Advantage plan. So if somebody is already getting care at the Mayo Clinic, or if they live nearby and would want to get care there, then I usually say, then you probably should go on a supplement, especially since it's, there's guaranteed issue when you're 65, you can get right in, and you're it's still relatively affordable compared to what you've been paying your whole life up until now.
Yeah, I had a buddy that I put on a supplement in Palm Springs, and he got throat cancer. He beat it, so there's not some awful end to this story. But he had a supplement, and he booked an Airbnb in Scottsdale for 3 months, and just walked in the door at Mayo Clinic, and you needed a Medicare supplement to go to Mayo. So
yeah. Now I've heard though that even if you have the supplement, there's balanced billing, and you'll still pay more. You still pay.
Yeah, he did pay. They found a way to bill him. He didn't complain about it. So, but yeah, they're very like finicky or exclusive, or even like Cleveland Clinic doesn't work that way, but right. Mayo sure does.
Yeah, but here in Arizona, what I've found is that most of the doctors are in network in one place or another, and most of them are not. The networks are not like as segmented as they are in California. So one doctor might work at Banner and also at Dignity and also at Honor Health. Like, it's not, you don't have to worry about, and then the networks include multiple hospital systems. So there's really just not that same issue that there is in California, where you have one doctor in this network and one doctor in that network, and you can't find an HMO that includes them both. So you have to go with the supplement if you want to keep your doctors. Yeah,
it's very polarizing in Southern California in a way that it's not in other areas. I agree.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a great education. It's a little different than how I do it, but I learned some new things. I could probably show you my way and teach you a couple things, but I think at this point,
I'm sure
we're both bored. I do this podcast is called Piece of Work. I'm thinking about having a podcast specifically about Medicare called Medicare Moxie. I'm writing a book called Medicare Moxie.
Nice.
I like that word because it kind of sounds powerful and a little bit fun. And that's kind of my goal, is to help people sort of understand Medicare at such a level that they're not so scared of it. Because I agree with you that there's so many scare tactics and just fear mongering, as you said, in this industry. They make it so much more complicated than it needs to be. It's really pretty simple, but the penalties and just the rules, it makes it so scary. So my goal is always just to kind of put people at ease and, make them feel in control of their own destiny, so if you will. So anyway, but that said, this podcast is called Piece of Work. So it's more about personal stories. So I love, you shared how you got into Medicare. You mentioned that there was some personal stuff going on. We only have a few more minutes because I know your tight time frame has us only till 2:30. So no, I'm even good, though we have extra time, I know we have extra time, but I'm going to respect your time so you can prepare for your next client.
No, I'm okay it's up to you, but I'm okay for 36 minutes.
All right. Well, I don't think we'll go that long, but I would like to change gears just a little bit and talk just a little bit about how you got your start in Medicare and what was happening personally, and whatever you want to share. I know you've shared some of this with me, but
yeah. So I think as I look back, I sometimes you can just see so clearly, why you had certain results or didn't have certain results in your life. And I can see it way more clearly now. But yeah, probably what ended the corporate career was I was probably dealing with a little bit of like cyclical depression. Like I always say, like if I worked in the post office, you probably never would have noticed. But if you're in sales and marketing, like your attitude's probably your biggest.
And you have to be on. It's really hard when you have a career where you like literally have to be on. Like, how do you? Some of us, I think that we just have rhythms and ups and downs, seasonal and cyclical, like you said.
Yeah. And I had this great job. I was underperforming their expectations and mine. And I was in Las Vegas, about to drive back to San Diego. And my boss, who I just had dinner with about a month ago, he's just like the greatest guy ever. We had that phone call where they're going to put you on that like probation thing, right?
We're like, yeah, we're not.
And I was just ticked off at myself and ticked off at him and projecting and everything like that. So I get on the road, you got to drive 5 hours, and I'm just upset with myself. I was even upset with him. And then about an hour or two into it, I was like, dude, this guy's totally in my corner. Like, even though I felt like he shouldn't be. And I thought, I'm not going to get through this by treating this guy as an adversary. Like he's just been in my corner, like all in all the time. So I'm like trying to get my head right. I was actually, listening to some like Joel Osteen, just trying to grab something, I got a long drive and just trying to, reset the perspective. Right. So the short version is, as I got into California, it was like 11:30 at night. It was dark. I was coming down this hill on the freeway, pouring rain, like movie level, like torrential downpours. And I think you've driven in California. We always joke, nobody knows how to drive in California. Like, the visibility is awful because it's fog. But if you can see, the tail lights in front of you, they're doing 75 and you're doing 75. And that's California freeway driving. And I was in the fast lane, and suddenly these two sets of headlights, I'm out on the freeway, so you're only expecting tail lights. And these two sets of headlights pop out just to the left of me, like just to the left of the fast lane shoulder. And these cars spun out, and I pulled over to try to provide some aid to them because the freeway shoulder is at the base of a hill. So it's like they're sitting in a bowling ball gutter. There was no sirens or anything like that. And I was like, man,
it's just happening.
Yeah. And I thought, you know what? I mean, these headlights popped out of nowhere. I was like, I thankfully they were just to the left of the path of traffic, but it was dicey. And I just, in a very out of control moment, like emotionally, was trying to get out of my own head and, think of someone else and maybe even exhibit a little bit of control over something. I don't know. And I thought, if I pull over ahead of these two cars, I can get those people out of their cars and into mine. And that would be at least safer than situation they're in. Cause I was like, if they're in those cars and those cars get hit, which is very believable at the time, they're going to get killed. And if they get out of their car, there's nowhere to stand but the shoulder. They're going to get killed. So I pulled over to help them. Long story short, I got the occupants of those two cars into my car, felt good about it, kind of went through this adrenaline rush and then this adrenaline dump. And then right when I thought
everything was impressive that you were able to see that through. I'm trying to picture the scene and exactly where you pull, and it's hard to picture it and hard to think how you were able to think so clearly in that moment. Yeah.
And everything, I have a blog post about it, but basically that the title of it is You Can't Jam, in a way to try to explain PTSD to people is like, you can't jam 40 minutes into 4 because your brain doesn't work that way. And very often I think what happens with people experiencing post-traumatic stress, which was the result of this, is it's just a lot to process, and it's very difficult to segment it. And so anyway, I got the people out of their car and then called 911. And right when 911 said, okay, great, we're coming. And I thought, cool, this is what I was hoping to be helpful. Right. So right at that moment on that adrenaline dump, like everything is going to be okay. And then I heard another car crash, and there was another, remember it's raining. It's like down a hill. It's like this car had flipped over a couple 100 yards up the freeway, and then came sliding down the shoulder. And as it got into the shoulder, it would bounce off the hill. because it's like fast lane, shoulder, and then hill. So there's nowhere to go once you get to the shoulder. And that the freeway was kind of angled more towards the base of that hill. So like, you're sliding on your roof, eventually you're going to come into that shoulder, and then that upside down car just smashes into the car, one of the cars of the people who are now in my car. So everything I was afraid of why I had pulled over is now happening. Right. And I still had 911 on the phone, and I said, oh my gosh, another car just crashed. And I just told him not to send medical. And I said, you should probably send medical. And the lady said, okay. And then she hung up the phone. And it was like the security blanket. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe she hung up on me.
Yeah, what am I going to do now? Now I'm in charge.
Yeah. So then suddenly I started sprinting back to that spot, which I was petrified of, which is that spot where the first car was exactly why I pulled over. Because I'm like, people can't, now there's two cars there, right?
Now you're going there. Into the fire, so to speak.
Right. The exact place I'm like very fearful of for others and for me. And then as I was running up, I got about 30 yards out, and I see three guys get out of the upside down car. And again, I'm looking against traffic. So it's all silhouettes, like thousands of, white headlights coming through the fog. And I see three guys get out, and they ran up the hill, which is exactly where I was running to try to get them to do. So I stopped. And I'm just constant like risk assessment. And I just said, they're okay enough to run, which is great. Help is already on the way because I already called 911. And they just ran to the exact place that I'm running to tell them to go. And I just had this moment where I thought, if I keep advancing on them, it's not going to decrease their risk, and it'll only increase mine. Mm-hmm. So I felt like it was
spoken like a true insurance agent.
Yeah, right. So I felt like it was okay to think of myself, So yeah. I had this moment
that you have to do as a nurse, as a first responder. I mean, that's there's nothing wrong with that. I see you getting emotional, but that is very real. I mean, your life is also valuable.
Yeah. So now this is like the second adrenaline dump, because mm-hmm. I was full of all this adrenaline, and then, okay, they're okay. And okay, well, I can run back to safety. Help's on the way. Right. I felt like there's three people on that hill that are okay. There's three people in my car. I'm the only knucklehead in this shoulder that's quickly proving my greatest fears, correct. So I took one more look at them. I turned my back, and I took about 10 like jogging steps back to my car. And it was kind of the first time that, like you never feel your age, you can always tell who's older than you, but you act like you're the same age as everybody younger than you. And it was the first time I realized maybe I don't remember what it's like to be 16. The three guys weren't three men. They were 16 to 17-year-old boys. And I turned my back. And I don't have any responsibility for this, but like it took a while to, navigate this. And I went back to safety, and they were safe. And two of the three boys like ran off the hill to dig through their upside down car the moment I turned my back to grab their weed out or whatever. And in that moment, on like my 10th step, another car slid out of control and came and hit those two cars. And my head was like on a swivel at this point. And I turn around and just see the silhouette of another car just crashing into the upside down car and the car of the couple that are in my car. And I saw this body fly through the air. And that was kind of the moment I kind of knew like my brain was acting differently, because probably the first moment where I knew there was like some sort of overload, like, because what you saw, but you don't.
You've only seen that in movies up until that point.
Yeah. So I stop, and I'm like slightly drier than if I jumped into a pool with my clothes on. Like that's how wet it is. And I went to grab my smartphone, and you can't swipe a smartphone when the face is wet. So I'm like panicking, trying to do that because I don't want to run back there. And then I can't do it. I can't do anything. So, here I am like now approaching this spot again, and it's getting worse and worse. So I run around these cars fully expecting to see somebody dead, which I didn't. But And I didn't understand how I saw a body. Like they were on the hill. I didn't, understand that they came off the hill at that point. And the one kid who hadn't come off the hill had now come down the hill, and he's standing in the shoulder. And I run around these cars, and it's obviously he's in shock, and he just looks at me, and I realize these are boys. These aren't men. And I said, you have to get back on the hill. And he said, no, I didn't. I'm sorry. The first thing he said is, my best friend just died. And I said, I know. I said, I'm so sorry. I said, you have to get on the hill. And he said, he's my best friend. He's my homie. And this kid is standing so close to freeway traffic, because I'm sure when it happened, it's very clear to me, he doesn't understand the totality of the circumstances, nor should he. But he's so close to freeway traffic. If he took 2 steps back, he's in the fast lane, and the cars aren't stopping. They're just whizzing by, and nobody has any visibility until they're right on us. And we have that conversation like 2 or 3 times. And I didn't feel calm, but I was speaking calmly. Because I just thought I was going to run up and in 3 seconds get him on the hill. And now suddenly I'm like, I don't want to be here.
Get him on the hill. Yeah. It's like trying to save someone drowning in there.
Yeah. But I don't want to be here, but I can't leave without him. And I'm like looking up the freeway, waiting for the next set of headlights to come down the shoulder, which is, not just possible, but highly probable, because it's already happened twice in the last 3 minutes. And I get to this point, which I realized was actually the greatest source of my trauma. I'm a slow learner. It took me about 3 years to figure this out, but where these aren't rational thoughts. I'm just like, I've processed them now. But number one, I felt kind of punished for trying, because I was failing so much in other parts of my life. Which usually means you're half-assing it. You're not putting in 100%. And then suddenly in this situation, we've had 3 situations in 3 minutes, and I am trying harder than I've ever tried in my life. I'm not worried about wife and kids at home, or like I'm just trying to be helpful. And every time I helped or tried to help, the first time I kind of got the result I wanted. And then as soon as I had that moment of like, oh gosh, this is good, this is what I was hoping to do, then it got worse. And then I didn't judge it, and I just tried even harder. And then then I thought the boys were going to be okay. And then I thought, okay, that's good. And then it got worse. And now here we are. Now I'm here trying to try again in the 3rd minute. And this kid can't tell his brain can't tell his body to move. And I start realizing, like, I don't know if I'm getting out of here, but I also know I'm not leaving. And there's a saying that there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. I'm not an atheist, but it's like, it makes sense. Right. And I can tell you, like, when everything else is exhausted, people talk about, but you will pray. You could have no faith. You will pray, because it's the only thing left. And I basically got this moment that I stopped, and I said, we're either both getting up on the hill together, or we're standing here. And the longer we stand here, the
more likely we're going to die.
Right. So I actually stopped looking up the hill, and I just prayed, and I just said, God, I said, give me 15 seconds of no more car wrecks to just figure out what to do. And the message that came to me in as clearly as any unspoken message I've ever gotten, which is just amazing, was hug him, which made total sense. I didn't question it. I'm like, yes. But I also realized, like, I can't aggress towards this guy. Like, if I move quickly towards him and he takes 1 or 2 steps back, he's dead. It's kind of like there's a person with their feet on the edge of a cliff, and you can't move too quickly. And so now I'm feeling even more helpless. And I thought, what do I do? So I just stood there. I accepted everything. I kind of got this moment of just, it is what it is. I put my arms out and just stared at him, and hoping that would break the moment. And then he walked towards me, and I hugged him for 10 really long seconds. And then at about the 10-second mark, I kind of like grabbed his shoulders, and I just calmly said, you have to get, and he made eye contact with me at that point. So you have to get on the hill. And that kind of broke the moment. And then he went up the hill. And then I was like, all right, do I want to run back to my car and turn my back on this traffic, which didn't seem appealing? Or do I want to run ahead because I figured emergency services will probably stop before the accident, not after. So then I sprinted about 40 yards, and then I ran up the hill. The hill was like this muddy mess. Like it was like very difficult to traverse. So then I got up there. I was able to call 911, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're on our way." And I said, I had called before. I said, "But there's a fatality now." And I, got upset. And the lady was just like, just make sure you're safe. I said, "Look, I'm in the safest place I could be given the circumstances." But I said, "This is just so sad." So everything I just shared with you was about 3.5, maybe 4 minutes. And then I sat on that hill watching traffic whiz by with nobody stopping, people kind of skidding a little bit and praying to God that there wouldn't be another accident. And I sat there for about 25 minutes before anybody showed up. And then they wound up, because it was a fatality, they shut down like all 5 lanes. And then the first couple that I put in my car was like this 21-year-old couple going on a cruise for the first time. So I wound up driving them to rendezvous with a friend. Then I drove home, and sorry. The other thing I guess I can't overlook is I was chatting with them, and then there was this guy, this tow truck driver, and we're just walking around the scene because like there's thousands of cars behind us in the rain. It's midnight. Nobody can go because there's a death. And this tow truck driver said, "Oh, were you in the accident?" I said, "No, I pulled over," and I kind of told him the story. And he said, "Oh yeah, the guy whose friend died is in my truck." I said, "What?" And he pointed to his truck, his flatbed, and the kid that I had hugged was in the passenger seat sobbing. And I said, "Is it okay if I go sit in your driver's seat and check in on him?" He said, "Yeah." So I went over there, and like we had the same conversation as we did 30 minutes before. He said, "My best friend died." I said, "I know. I'm so sorry." I said, "What's your name?" And his name was David. "And what was your friend's name?" His name was Brian. And I said, "Do you want to say a prayer, that," I don't know what I said, something like that God just welcomes Brian, in open arms. He said, "Yeah." And he, we held hands, and I mustered up like some fractured version of a prayer. Right. And then suddenly I realized, oh my gosh, there was a third kid. And I said, "Well, wasn't there a third?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Where is he?" And he pointed, he said, "He's over in that car." So then I walked up to that car, and I didn't understand who was who at the time, but the kid that is in that car was the one whose body got thrown, and he was still alive. So it was another, the kid that died was trapped in between cars or whatever. But so I went and knocked on the window, and somebody had stopped at that point and let the guy sit in his car. And like this kid was really, really, 16, 17. And he rolls down the window, and he's just in deep shock. Like everything's very delayed, And I said, "George?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "David sent me over here, see if you're okay." And then he's like, "Is David okay?" I said, "He's okay. He's okay." I said, "Just want to check on you." I said, we said a prayer for Brian, and I said, "Do you want to say a prayer?" And he kind of hands me his hand. And as a nurse, you've probably seen this where somebody is like blood is running through their veins. They are clearly alive, but there's just nothing left in just like, so I held his hand, and it was like, if it wasn't warm, I would have worried the kid was dead. I mean, it was that he was just physically exhausted. And I said a prayer, with him. And then after that, I drove the other couple home, and I went home, and about 5 days later, it kind of hit me, and I was already kind of wrapped up in some other stuff. And I just had a really difficult time resolving and processing the PTSD, but I had a lot of good resources, it took me.
How many years ago was this, Brian?
So actually this December will be 10 years. Awesome. But it really forced a lot of positive changes in my life. No rational person would sign up to say, "I want to get positive changes, and here's the way you do it." But sometimes, ultimately,
it takes something life-changing to even negative way.
Yeah. So, what I would say is like, I feel like part of the journey was I have now found gratitude in places I didn't think gratitude could exist, which is a pretty neat thing and then there's other things that I just like to also point out to people sometimes, like, and you and I are like big on gratitude and stuff, and I'll find it anywhere I can get it. But there's some things that are just so awful, like there's no room for gratitude. And that's where you just have to find acceptance. It's, and you can't wrap up everything with a bow, and then you and I have talked about this, like, what do you do with that? Well, then, as you start learning some things and you hope you could be helpful to others, there's this weird balance where you're kind of oversharing with people who didn't ask, or just ask one question and you kind of dump on them. And sometimes there's something to share with other people. Sometimes the catalyst is not that you need to run out and tell a whole bunch of people that didn't ask about your crappy, miserable story, but it's that you found a way to make changes, which obviously you will experience positively, but the world experiences the better version of you positively as well. So I try not to force feed it onto other people. I just think it's kind of an unfair burden to put on people. And as you can see, I do an awful job of abbreviating it,
No, I think your story it's impactful, but what I always like to focus on, and what I know you've done is, you had this awful thing happen to you, and yes, and you had very mixed feelings, I'm sure, about it. Even in the moment, you were both a hero and you probably felt like you should have done things differently. And it's a lot, like you said, it's a lot crammed into a small amount of time. How did you ultimately, like, what is the lesson for you? What do you feel like, people ask sometimes, why me? Why did this happen to me? What do you think about that in the end?
Yeah. So, there's I'm not, I know there's no such thing as a perfect Christian, but I'm like far from the perfect Christian, but I've got faith, and I wasn't terribly attached to my faith at that point, but not non-existent either. And I knew that, you're not supposed to question, right? Mm-hmm. I wound up, again, I can see
that's an interesting thing, that you knew that you're not supposed to question. That makes me sad that you thought you weren't supposed to question your faith. I think that I totally disagree with that. Yeah, I believe that we should always question. That doubt is the source of faith. If you don't have doubt, you can't have faith. Like,
no, that's a good. I don't mean to back
a lot of time. No, but it's so interesting that it was just like, you knew you weren't supposed to question, because if you grow up in a Catholic faith or just any kind of very religious faith, you're not. This is what we do. This is why, you're not supposed to question. But I fight back on that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And I don't mean to backpedal on that, because that's a good point. But I guess, people, it's God's plan, right? Right. And you go, but faith aside, what I can see that happen now is, and I learned this at something called the Hoffman process, which was largely responsive. Several things helped me kind of turn the corner. The Hoffman process was amazing. But like one of the things they and I won't do it justice, I'm just giving you this little excerpt, but it's just identifying the difference between your intellectual self and your emotional self. I was shut down emotionally entirely. I was trying to intellectualize everything. And as you can imagine, like if two of your tires popped, you'd be relying heavily on the other two, right? And I just wasn't getting anywhere. And the only emotions I experienced was, negative emotions around the event, the results, how I felt. I mean, it was so vivid that, you have involuntary flashbacks for a long time. And though that was all, I could get some joy out of my kids, being around my kids at the time. And they were about 4 at the time. And, but other than that, I was not experiencing joy. I was emotionally shut down while trying not to be. I wasn't trying to be disengaged, but I mean, there was nothing in the tank, and I was intellectualizing everything. And ultimately, several things helped in the interest of time. The Hoffman process would be the greatest gift anybody could give to themselves. It doesn't matter what you're dealing with. Like it's incredible. I don't bring this up to sound hoity-toity or anything, but to the extent that, celebrities or, like top level executives who could wipe their bottoms with $100 bills, Danielle, will just go wherever the best results are. Like a lot of those people have been to Hoffman, and it's pretty awesome. But not everybody's going to have the time or money to go do that. The other thing that was really helpful, which is available to everybody, is EMDR through a licensed therapist. Yep. And my wife uncovered, she was on like a 40th or 50th birthday party. None of the girls really knew each other, but like two women had like really late term miscarriages, and they hadn't even known each other. They were just all guests at the party, and both of them had gone to EMDR. And my wife's like, "What the heck is this?" I sat down with a dad at school who's a decorated combat vet from Iraq, I think, and he and I would like have coffee, and he had done prolonged exposure therapy. And I remember when I sat down with him, he's like, "Yeah, it really works." I was like, "Oh, cool." I'm like ready to do it. And I was already like, I'm still trying to make a living. I didn't really take any more than a month off from work dealing with this stuff. And, we're losing all our assets, and I got kids and a wife and everything. And, but I remember him saying, he's like, "Yeah, but the problem with prolonged exposure therapy is like, you're journaling, you're recording, you're listening to yourself," which candidly, I kind of accidentally did anyway. But he's like, "You feel miserable to start."
While you're doing it. Yeah.
I'm like, I can't feel any more miserable than I do right now. Like I got to make a living and starting in the Medicare business and ultimately, but eye movement desensitization reprocessing, nobody knows why it works. It was very, very helpful. If you can afford a therapist, you can afford to get that. My therapist was great, but I think what's even more comforting to anybody listening who cares is anybody I've spoken to who's done EMDR with their own therapist has gotten very similar results, which means my therapist, as awesome as she is, it's not like she has the magic wand. She just follows the process.
Right.
And really, I guess what I would say to say where are things now, a traumatic event's never going to go away. But it used to, I wrote in the blog about this like dirty window theory that, you start off and you have all these involuntary flashbacks, and they kind of like take over, and eventually they dull, and you think that's progress. But for me, the duller ones lasted a long time, to the point where you're like, man, is this as good as it's going to get? So I could have a conversation with you and I'm having involuntary flashbacks, but I can still kind of engage in conversation. And maybe you catch on to it, maybe not. And over time you learn to hide it. So it's like You're looking through the window and it's dirt. You could see through a dirty window, but not as well as if it was clear, right? And it kind of get to this point where you're like, man, is this as good as it's going to get? And the thing, because involuntary means it shows up whenever it wants, right? At the end of, the Hoffman process, EMDR, and maybe a couple of other things I did, I would say now the event never goes away, but it sits on a shelf. If I want to visit it, I pull it off the shelf. I kind of work on some processing. I put it back, but it doesn't fall in my lap and dictate my day. And to me, that, maybe other people have suffered different and worse forms of trauma, but that's pretty good, a lot of positive things have happened since I was able to stick it on the shelf.
I think honestly, just the fact that you went there and you processed it and you didn't just stuff it down is huge, because I think it would be very easy all those things you said, all those responsibilities you had, this was one day in your life, one very traumatic day, but one day it would have been easy to just say, you know what, I'm a man, I'm 40-year-old, 30, whatever year old man. I have to work for a living. I don't have time to deal with this, and just stuff it down. And you could have gone down a route of total destruction. You could have, become an addict. There's so many things that could have happened if you refused to deal with it. And so I think that that's huge that you did recognize, you know what, I'm not right with this. And that you felt those emotions, you're still feeling them. I see you feeling them even as you're telling me the story. I think that's so important. It's so easy. And so many people go toward numbing themselves from painful things. And life happens. Life is painful sometimes.
Yeah, and I had no shortage of trying to stuff it down. I mean, I promise you that was
we all do. No one
strategy one through 37 before I discovered Hoffman.
Before you realize that's not going to work. All right. Well, we only have a few minutes, so I do want to just kind of wrap it up. But like I said, I think that this totally ties in. We're all a piece of work, a work in progress, and a work of art all at the same time. And even in that story, even in that moment, the way you handled it, you were a piece of work, a work in progress, and a work of art. You saved people's lives. You didn't save everyone's lives, but you saved some people's lives that night. And you stayed when you could have gone. You were there, and that's huge. You're a hero. So don't ever take that away from yourself. And then you help save people's lives with Medicare every day too.
Right.
It's a little bit less dramatic, but
right. Thankfully,
you do it in your own way. And I loved hearing even that part too. So, just to wrap it up, if people do want to find you either for, to see your Medicare videos, where are you, how can they find you on LinkedIn? How can they find you on, and also if you want to share that blog post where they could find that, I think, if you feel like making it public to all my, hundreds of thousands of listeners, you may share that now. Go ahead and share with us how we can find you.
Yeah, for sure. So on LinkedIn is just Brian McArthur, Brian with an I, MCARTHUR. Designmymedicare.com is the website. And then that has a link to, in the media section, you'll see some interviews I've done. This will probably wind up there. And then I have a YouTube channel where I kind of break things down into some smaller, Medicare related pieces. And the blog post, it's like civilian-PTSD-dad.blog or something. I'll probably have to email it to you.
Send me the link and I'll put it in the show notes if you want to share it.
I'm happy to.
I read it. I thought it was well written and good. And if you ever want to turn it into a book, turn that and your whole story into a meaningful memoir. Because a memoir is more than just a story of our life or a story of even a particular time of our life. It should have meaning. It should have, a theme and growth and a narrative arc and all these things that you see in a movie that you enjoy. A memoir, even though it's a true story, needs to have that too. And so one of the things I'm adding into my my wheelhouse, which is packed full already,
right,
is helping people with some writing coaching. I just had a number of people that have been like, how did you write that? And I want to write this story about such and such. Can you help me? So I am doing that. So far just on a one-on-one basis, but if you ever have any desire to turn it into something more than the blog post, I'd love to help.
Oh, for sure. No, I'm glad. And I've read your book and you're a great writer. I really enjoyed. I don't know how to articulate that. You're a really good writer. So, but no, that's great to know. And I think about it, it's a balance between maybe
after you retire.
Yeah. It's am I doing this out of ego, or is there something that's good for people? Or sometimes if it's good for me, writing's really therapeutic for me. I'm sure it is for you, and you've done way more than me. Yeah. And then, but the great thing about getting anything on video or writing is once it's there forever.
Totally.
And you can you don't have to be so attached to outcome because people will find the stuff that they need when they need it. And I just think it's so great about you writing the book and then doing these interviews and, I really relate a lot to your path to self-reflection that I read about in your book. And, of course it's even more fun to kind of know the person and go down the rabbit hole, but it's really an awesome book and great.
Thank you. You don't need to toot my horn.
No, but I really, I'm not blowing sunshine. I really mean it. And I think it's, I'm sure it's helpful to a lot of people who continue to be, because it's published, it'll be there forever. So
people feel seen when they read it. Just like I think some people will listen to your story and feel seen. They'll be like, oh, I felt that. I've been there. Their situation might be different, but I don't want to make you late for your next appointment. I know you've got to call them at 3:00 on the dot. You can go ahead and start dialing. But anyway, find Brian. And if you want to, in the meantime, just keep writing pages and pages of notes. And someday, if you want to turn it into something, I'll help you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank you for having me. That's so
great to talk to you today.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.